Welcome back everybody. Today I'm going to be doing a small tutorial with you, as in size wise. So we're going to be painting this beautiful butterfly. Now in the UK we see these butterflies a lot. They're called a painted lady, and they've got such beautiful orange colours on them, so I thought it would be a lovely piece to paint together. And he's sat on what looks like a little sort of cornflower possibly, so yeah, with the purple and the orange I thought they'd look really pretty. So I got this image from Pixabay. It's a royalty-free website that everyone can use. So if you want to have a go at actually painting this one at home, that's where you can get the image from. However, when I set up my Patreon channel, I will have everything attached, so all the images will be on there ready for you to actually use. So I've already sketched out the outline. I have done a previous tutorial where you can see how I go about transferring the image from your printout onto your watercolour paper. So have a little look for that, and I'll put the link attached to this video so that you can follow along, and then you can use that same technique for any of my paintings. So I've drawn it all out. We're going for like an A5 size, so a smaller size with this one. I've laid out my colours that I'm going to be using. I've got my brushes, my tissue for obviously cleaning them, my mixing palette and some water. And this is everything we're going to need. So the watercolour paper I'm using is Bockingford cold press, and it's 300 GSM. So you don't have to go with the same brand. I like Bockingford. It's my sort of go-to paper really. Not sponsored in any way, it's just that it's my personal preference. I'll have to do a tutorial with you all about different types of papers and things, might come in handy, so let me know in the comments. Don't forget to also like and subscribe my channel. I'm going to be doing lots more of these watercolour tutorials with you, so if you like wildlife, if you want to have a go at using watercolours but you don't know where to start, subscribe to my channel, and each week I'm aiming to upload at least one video so that you can follow along and have a go at home, and of course share what you do. I love to see what you do at home. So the brushes I'm going to be using are just two. I've got a size 4 watercolour brush. These are synthetic brushes. I don't really use sable. I find with my style of painting that the synthetic ones are brilliant. And this one is a 3-0. So this one's a System 3, which is usually a paintbrush for acrylics. It's a synthetic brush, but it's lovely and soft, and I find it's really, really good with the watercolours. So I'm going to start off by getting my colours ready on my palette, and I'm going to use the slightly larger brush to do this. Now when I create my paintings, I like to use the watercolours quite thin, which sort of really lightens the colours down for you. It enables you to really concentrate on being able to build up that colour in thin, light layers. And then it enables you to slowly but surely make the colours as dark as you want, rather than going in too heavy and too dark at the beginning. I like to take it step by step and really look at those different colour tones and try and mimic that when it comes to doing the painting. So the two colours I've got on here that I'm just getting off of my half pans and putting onto my palette. So I've got a nice bright orange, and I've also got this one which is like a sort of a yellowy orange colour. It's not a bright yellow. However, if you've only got a yellow in your palette, that's absolutely fine. You'll be able to mix it with some orange and it will give you this slightly sort of orangey yellow tone. And then I'm also going to put in a little bit of yellow ochre, which is like a mustardy brown sort of colour. Now I find introducing this to brighter shades does give it a slightly more muted effect. And particularly when you're doing watercolours and it's wildlife based, I find having those colours with a slight muted, slight edge taken off of them does make them look better on the page. So they're the only colours I'm going to need at the moment, and I'm going to be working on this area around here. So this picture here's got quite heavy lines. This is because this is the image I've used to actually transfer the picture onto my page. just off of camera, I've got the actual same image on my computer screen, so I'm going to be using that to also use as reference. I sometimes find it enables you to zoom in so you can see the detail and that a lot easier than trying to get really close to an image. So if you've got that option at home, fantastic. But if you haven't, then just use your reference picture, or you can always print it a little bit larger, and then that will enable you to really zoom in and see the details. So what I'm doing here, I've got a little bit of the orange. I've pulled some of the colour up to one side and really watered it down to really thin out those pigments. And you can see it then enables me to have a much paler colour. I've introduced a little bit of the yellow to it, and also a little bit of the yellow ochre, and hopefully it will start to then create a similar colour to the inside of these wings. Now what I'm going to do to begin with, because as I said to you, I like to build it up in thin layers, I'm going to start adding in these areas that have got the orange, and as you can see they're going on quite pale. It will get darker in areas, so as we start to layer up that colour, we can then start to make it that little bit darker and more vibrant. And you'll see what I mean as we start painting along together. So if you're painting along with me, get those colours going, and don't forget as well, when it comes to you following me with these tutorials, if you want to pause them at any point, you can. You can rewind them, which is the lovely thing about following along when you've got it on your screen at home. So I'm going to start adding in some of this orange on here. And I'm not too worried about painting over where the black areas are on the design. I'm going to leave those blank, and I will paint them in sections. Now I sometimes find when I describe to people how to paint, I often say to them, think of it as like a jigsaw puzzle, and you're building it up section at a time. I think sometimes if you look at the whole picture as a finished piece, it can be a bit overwhelming, and often people then, that's what puts people off. That's often why people then don't go ahead and have a go at painting. But if you break down the picture into sections and do a little bit at a time, before you know it, that jigsaw puzzle's been made, put together, and you have a finished painting. So I'm going ahead here now. This colour's gone a little bit too orange, so I'm going to add a little bit more yellow onto my palette, thin it down a little bit, and continue adding in some of that orange around here. And it's quite yellow in areas, so I want to introduce that. Now around the top section here, there's a lot more yellow, so I'm going to add a little bit more yellow into those parts to make the colour that little bit brighter. And if you're finding you're getting like a line between one area because it's wet and another area because it's drying, clean your brush off, and just with a damp brush like I just did here, so you clean your brush off. I want to add a bit more yellow here, so I'll talk you through what I'm doing. So I'm going to add a little bit more yellow along this top edge here. Like so. And then to ensure that I blend that nicely into the colour I've already got, I'm just going to wash off my brush, wipe off the excess water, because I don't want my brush to be soaking wet, I just want it to be damp. And then, whilst this paint's still wet, I'm just going to gently pull down the sides of the section that I've just painted into the colour that was already there. And you'll find then that you'll get a nice gradual change from one colour to another, rather than there being big vibrant sections sticking out as you go along. So I'll add in a little bit more orange in here, and what I'm now doing is, rather than using brush strokes, I'm actually just dabbing on the colour in areas around here. So I'm just going to dab on some of the orange around there, and you can see it's really starting to bring that colour to life. I'm going to add a little bit more orange around here, like so. There we go. And you can see what I mean here. You've got quite an edge on the orange, between the orange and the yellow base. So with my damp brush, I'm just going to go back over that, and can you see how it blends the two together? And you haven't got that big heavy edge anymore. There we go. So I'm going to let that dry. Remix up a little bit of the initial colour we had. So we want a bit of the orange, a little bit of yellow, and some of that yellow ochre. And I'm going to allow this area here to dry, and I'm going to start over here now. So following my image, I'm going to start adding in some of those colours. And if I want to make that colour a little bit lighter, I've washed off my brush, and all I'm doing now is just with a damp brush pulling down the pigment that's already on the paper. And you can see, because the paper is obviously a light colour, you can see even with it being quite pale, you can see that colour easily on the page. So I'm just going to then go in there and dab in, like we did before, some of this orange. Just bring out some of those brighter areas. Wash off my brush, and it's very slightly damp, and then I can move that colour around how I want it and blend it into the base colour, like so. And we can carry that on up here, so we've got some orange around this area here. And the nice thing about following these tutorials as well is you can very much do it in your own time. So it might be that you want to sit and follow the whole tutorial from start to finish, or it might be that you can only do sort of 20-30 minutes at a go, then you want to stop it, come back to it. And the nice thing about the watercolours is if you've got all the colours on your palette, even if they dry out totally, as soon as you put water back on them, it reactivates your colour. So as long as you leave your palette as it is, you've not lost all that lovely colour that you had previously. It will match the other areas that you've been painting because it's the same colour. And you can literally just pop a little bit of water on your palette and your colours are ready to go again. So I've just introduced a little bit more orange onto some of these areas. Here. There we are. You can see those lovely orange colours now starting to build. It also means as well, because I build them up in quite thin layers, if for any reason you went slightly wrong with your colour, it's very easy, because it's just a thin layer of colour, it's very easy to then kind of cover it up and go over it again. So don't panic too much if you go into an area that you shouldn't have done, or you think, oh goodness, I've put too much in there. Just simply clean off your brush, and with a damp brush you can start to blend out or lift out some of that colour. There we go, and you can see we're starting to build those nice yellows and those oranges. Now that orange will get a bit more vibrant along here, and we'll add in a lot more detail, but we'll do that with our smaller brush. So what I'm going to start doing now is this body area on the little butterfly is quite an ochre colour, but there's actually greens and browns, there's black, there's blue even in there as well. But what I'm going to do to begin with, just so I know at first glance where that body is in comparison to the rest of the actual butterfly, I'm going to go to my yellow ochre that's on my palette, water it really thin so it becomes very pale, and I'm then going to just map in the centre areas of his body. I say he, it could be a she, for those of you that are really good at knowing what animal species is what. You might be able to tell me if there is a difference between a male and a female. Sometimes it isn't always that obvious when you look at them, but there could be. So every day is a learning day. So do let me know if there is, as I'd love to learn. There we go. I'll just put in a very, very faint base colour. I also find on watercolour paper as well, I don't know for those of you that have done it before, I find that when you first put watercolour onto the page, it's like there's like a coating on the paper, and it doesn't absorb the colour initially as easily. But once you've got watercolour on the page and then you start adding more watercolour to it, it's like the paint goes on better. So there may well be like some special name for it, but I do find it's like there's a slight coating, whether it's just the way that the paper's been made, I don't know. But I find that by doing it in the thin layers like this, it breaks down that, and then it enables you to layer the colour up a lot easier without as much hard work. So that's just got our basis of our colour into the centre. So now what I'm going to actually do is start to add some of this detailing in with the slightly darker oranges. So I'm going to switch over to my small brush now. So this is a 3-0 brush. As I said, I'm using a System 3 Daler-Rowney brush, but you can use whatever brand you've got, or as long as it's a nice thin brush. You can see here in comparison to my finger, hopefully you can see that it is quite a thin brush. And I find the reason I really like using the synthetic brushes as opposed to the sable is I sometimes find with the thinner sable brushes, because they're very soft, they don't hold their point as well. So I find that by using a synthetic brush, it goes to a slightly better point, and then you're able to use it better to do all your fine detailing. So what I'm doing here is I'm doing what they call like a stippling effect. So I'm basically just dabbing the brush up and down very gently on the page. I've used the orange that I had previously, which is a nice dark rich orange, and what I'm going to do is follow this image that I've got, my reference picture, and I'm going to start adding in. Now you'll find when you look at the butterflies close up, it's like they've got lots and lots of little dots on them, on the wings and even the body. So when you're painting, paint the same way nature intended, and you'll find that your image will look a lot better then when it's complete. So I'm going to start slowly but surely dabbing my brush up and down into those areas, and you can see by doing that you're actually then making the colour that much brighter, and it is starting to look more like the reference picture. So we're going to dab that up and down and just build that up as you wish. Now if the orange is going on a little too dark, simply water it down. Add a bit more water and it will thin down the amount of pigment that's actually on your brush. It will also mean that you've then got a lighter shade of orange to work with. And it will give you like an in-between tone between this lighter shade that we've already put on and the really dark rich colour that's on your palette. So I'll slowly keep adding this in on this area here, like so. Now when it comes to layering your colours up, it's quite normal that you'll do a section, do another part, come back to it, and that's for two reasons. One is that it allows your paint to dry between your layers, so you can let that part dry, work on another part while that's drying, then when that's dry you can let that dry and then move back to it again. The other reason I do that as well is because as your picture develops, you will find that at the moment these look quite bright because they're on a white background. As you start adding the darker colours onto your picture, these colours might actually not look as bright as they need to be. So you'll probably want to come back to it and then introduce some more colour and introduce some darker shades and make some of those areas really pop. And it's absolutely fine to do that. And you'll find as you start painting as well, you'll follow a lot of the techniques that I do, but sometimes you'll develop your own as well, and that's absolutely fine to do that. As long as you're creating the image that you're happy with, then that's all part and parcel of the learning process. And it's also part and parcel of you learning to be an artist and getting confident with using the materials too. So hopefully you can see that the colours are starting to build now. We're starting to get some nice vibrant colours happening here. And those of you that have watched my previous video about how to draw the outline for this image, I also mentioned as well about learning to look. So the more you look, the more you notice, and then the more detail you can actually put into your artwork. And it's the same as you, for every picture you paint, you'll learn something new and you'll look more and you'll see more in your paintings as well. You'll notice colours and tones and detailing more than you did previously. And it's all part and parcel of learning. It's all part and parcel of becoming better at your craft. So I'm going to add some more around here because this colour's quite bright. I don't really want any up here. This part here is a bit lighter. Now I think I'm going to actually put a little bit of red in with the orange as well at a later date, and that should enable us to get some really nice vibrant areas of colour. There we go, and just keep building that round. A little bit dark orange here. Don't know how sensitive your computer is, whether you can actually hear my brush tapping up and down on my surface. There we go, and that has started off that lovely orange area on our butterfly. Now I think what I'm going to start doing next is actually the black areas, because that's going to really start bringing this butterfly alive. So whilst that orange is starting to dry, I'm going to put some black onto my palette. If you're using tubes, it's absolutely fine. Pop a little bit of black from your tube of paint onto your palette. This one here is an ivory black. So there are different blacks that you can get with different brands. This one's an ivory black. This one's a Winsor & Newton. I do use a combination of Winsor & Newton and also Daler Rowney watercolours. But again, not sponsored in any way. It's just purely, I just paint with what I like, what I find works. And I find the light fastness on it's very good. So I can always do a bit of a talk on that as well in a later video if you'd like to know about that. So I've put some black onto my palette, and as you can see here, I've started pulling it down a little bit and thinning it out because I want some areas to be not as dense in colour to others. So I'm switching over now back to my little brush, and I'm going to pick up some of that black. Now I'm going to start over here because this area here may still be a little bit damp. So I'm going to work over here, and then by the time I get down to this section, this will all be dry. So I'm going to start at the top, load up my brush, wipe off the excess. I want the brush to be full of paint, but I don't want it to be absolutely saturated, that it's blobbing paint onto my paper. So I wipe off the excess, and it also enables you to get a lovely point on your brush. And I can start then adding in some of these black areas. Now again, as you paint along, so at the minute, because I've thinned it down, it's going on a bit like a dark grey. I don't know if you can see that on the actual screen, but it's fine because we can then use that to our advantage, because some of the black areas on our butterfly they're not just all dense heavy black. There are different shades and tones, and there are some slight grey areas, so we can layer it up as dark or as light as we want. So I'll start working my way around and adding in those black sections. And then, like I said, you can layer it up. So if you want to then go back over any areas because you think, oh, actually, I need to make that a little bit darker, you can. And we've got, so this bit comes out here to the tip of that wing. Now, for those of you that have got the reference picture in front of you, as you start noticing, like we were saying about looking, you'll see along this top edge here, there's also a row of orange, but we will add that in later once the black has totally dried. And just work your way through. Now this could take a while, and just very slowly but surely take your time with it. If you need to go and have a cup of tea in between times, do. Big lover of tea or a coffee, depending on how you're feeling. But the key thing with any of my watercolours, for me, I find that painting is really therapeutic. It's my way of switching off. So hopefully you'll feel the same and you'll find it quite relaxing. I find it's just brilliant. You can get lost in a picture and just, yeah, have a bit of, it's a bit like meditating, I think. So you can slowly work your way around that wing and start to add in the areas that you can see. Now, if you find that working your way around, like for here, for example, you've got the white areas on the wing. If you go over an area by accident, or if you find it very difficult to sit and paint the black around the white sections, you can use some gouache, which is a thicker paint consistency to the watercolour. It's still a water-based paint, but you can use it to then go over the top of the black. So say, for example, you just wanted to paint the whole black section in of the wings, and you didn't want to painstakingly work your way around each section and paint around the white areas. You can use the gouache to put in those areas after the black has dried, and you can do it that way if you prefer. But like with a lot of art and a lot of painting and that, it's totally down to you. It's down to your personal preference. So I can always show you on another video how to use the gouache, as it is a really handy material to use with watercolours. They do kind of complement each other quite nicely. So I'll work my way around here. This is quite a fiddly bit. and I'm constantly looking at that reference picture. Constantly checking, you know, what bits, what colour, what bit needs adding in, how big are the sections. Do I need to add any extra texture? There we go, I've got a slightly larger spot. And don't get too worried either. So say for example you're painting and one of the areas isn't the exact shape of another. Now with some things obviously you want to get it right, but for example a spot on a butterfly, if it's not exactly the same as the reference picture, as I said, it's your art at the end of the day. As long as you're happy with it, don't get too hung up. Just enjoy the process, enjoy doing the painting, and have something that you're proud of. And the lovely thing about watercolours as well is if you get yourself a nice watercolour pad, every picture you do, even now for me, every picture I do, I'm learning something new. So it enables you to then have another go. You know, you can always then paint it again later. And that's half the fun, really. Go. Add in a few more darker areas now it's drying. And you can see that wing's really starting to come to life now. So I'm going to work down this side of the wing here. Bring it to about there. And like I said before, if at any point you want to pause the video, rewind it, please do. And there's a couple of lines through here, so I'm just going to put them in. There's one that comes up there as well. And hopefully, like with mine, your picture's now starting to come together. You're starting to see those beautiful markings on the wing. I'll go in a little bit more with the paint and make it a bit darker. And there we go. Start to join up those sections. A bit like we were saying earlier on with them being like a puzzle. Starting to join them up together. Do around the edge of this orange section. And I've just realised I've missed a section of the orange. So it's not the end of the world. We can add it in. Now this bit here should be orange. So I'm just going to go round it for now. I've just noticed it from looking at the picture. So I'm going to put in the next white part like that. And I'm just going to avoid that orange bit for now because I don't want to put black over the top of it because it can then be tricky to get rid of the black. You usually find with watercolour, like with a lot of my other tutorials, I've mentioned that you often start off with the lighter colours and then get darker. And it's the same when you're building up your layers. You start off a bit lighter and then you layer them up until you get a bit darker. And it's a lot easier because you'll find with watercolours, the lighter colours, you can kind of lighten them or remove them off of the page to an extent. With the darker colours, particularly black, once it's on the page, it's quite difficult to get rid of. There's ways of covering it up, and I can always do a video if you find that that's something that would help you. Let me know, and I can always do a video with you onto how to possibly save a picture or lighten certain colours if you've gone in there too heavy and too dark. So I'm going to keep working my way around this wing, adding in the darker areas on here. Now I'm finding my paint is starting to dry on my palette, so I'm going to need to put a little bit of water with it in a minute. You might find yours is doing the same. So I'm going to just put a bit of water with the paint, and you'll find that it'll just reactivate it and get it flowing a bit easier off your brush again. So I'm going to work back on this edge of the wing. Like so. It's like little round bumps in here. Go. Now before I forget, I'm going to clean my brush off, and I'm just going to pick up a little bit of that orange, and I'm going to fill in this section here that I'd forgotten. There we go, because otherwise I'll get to the next bit and I'll forget where it was. So go back to the black. I'm going to carry on putting that detail in on that wing. So I'm going to use that stippling effect, that dabbing up and down with my brush, to add some more texture and detail into the wing in sections. And now around this area on the wing is actually quite grey. So what I'm going to do is really thin out that black. And around here, I actually want to put it in slightly lighter and see how it actually gives you a grey tone without having to put white in it. As I've just thinned out the amount of pigment that's on there. That's enabled me to put that grey section in. And then I can go back and we can put in some more of the black. This is quite a definite like round section on here. So I'm trying to emphasise that on this bit here too. You can really see that on the pattern on the wing. And then a few more little tiny. This is the beauty of using this lovely fine brush, is you can get all that lovely tiny detailing on. So add that in there. Tiny little dabs around that edge, really tiny detail. can add some more. So then gets a slightly darker edge around here with the grey area that we just put in. There we go. Finish that edge on that wing, and you can see that it's really starting to build now. I'm really starting to get some of that detailing in. So I've also got this area here in the middle that is black also. So I'm going to add the paint into that area there. There we go. So pick up some of that black, that's better. Much more vibrant. I'm going to dab around here, up and down with that brush. Build that lovely texture. And it really does start to look like the texture of the wing then as well, which is lovely. It does have these lovely little tiny dots. So I'm going to put a few around the outside edge on here as well, just like in the reference picture. And then now this area along here on the wing is actually quite grey, so I'm going to stop the black here for now, and then I need to go in there a little bit lighter with a different shade. So I'm going to thin down the paint quite a bit to one side here and make it that nice light grey colour. And I'm going to start adding in some of that grey section along here. Now I do want some of the white of the page to also show through, so rather than just paint it all grey, I'm going to actually layer it in little spots. Like so. And can you see how it's going on grey, and I've not actually mixed a grey tone, it's purely just that I've watered down the black enough that it's thinned out the amount of pigment in the paint, and so it's making it a lot lighter to put on the page. I'll slowly layer that up like that. I think that works quite nicely. There we go. Now if you find as you're layering it up a bit darker, your little tiny spots are like disappearing, what that is your paint underneath is still quite wet. So if you let that dry, then when you put the little dots on like we did here, you'll see nice defined dots. Whereas at the moment, can you see how they're all kind of like blending into one another here? And it's just because the paint underneath is too wet. So I'm going to build up that base layer of colour, and then I'll come back to it and then add in some lovely fine detailing over the top. Here we go. So I'll start to get that grey in there. And at least you can see the difference in colour between the black and the grey section, which is what we wanted. And then that comes down here, need a little bit more paint, comes down here into this little area down along here. And then we continue with these beautiful markings on the wing, and we're into like the bottom section on the wing now. And I'll put a line in. Now With this butterfly, the edges of his wings are actually white, but because we've obviously got the white of the page, we do want to obviously put in an edge to the wing. So I'm actually putting in a very, very fine edge, so it doesn't look like it's sort of disappeared or you've not painted it in. And you can do the same on here. Now what I'm doing is I have watered down the black paint, so it's gone to that grey tone, so it's not like a big heavy cartoony edge line. It's very, very faint, and I'm just using that grey and just literally like the tip of my brush is only just brushing the surface, and it enables you to put on a really lovely fine line. And then we've got some lines running through the oranges and that here, so I'm going to put some of those in whilst I'm on this section. Touching my computer screen, stop it going into sleep mode. Now you want to make sure that your paint isn't really watery. If it's really, really watery, you're going to end up with big blobs on your page, and we don't want that. So you want to make sure that you're getting the right consistency. Now one tip that I often do when I'm doing the art classes is if you have a spare bit of watercolour paper to one side, and then before you paint it onto your picture, you can then try it out on the spare bit of paper first, and then make sure that it looks how you want it to look when it's on your actual artwork. So what I've done here is I've gone back to my original orange. I've got like a dirty brush, so basically I've got a little bit of black on there, but I want it to actually make that orange a little bit of a muddy orange, because I'm going to then use that to put in some more of these darker areas. Now I'm over here, I want to actually highlight some of these areas a little bit more than what they were. And this is what I mean when I said about like bobbing between sections. There we go. And it's just bringing out that orange colour a little bit more on here, like so. It's really starting to give you that lovely orange that the painted lady butterfly has. Just wash my brush off. I'm going to go back to that thinned out black. I want it to flow off my brush nicely. And I've got a black line that runs across here, and another one that runs here, and then I've got one that runs along the bottom like that. And it's starting to add in that lovely detail, which is great. So I'm going to come back and do some more of these black areas here. So I'm going to come back to my black on the palette. Like so. Get that colour flowing. Now it may be that you need to reload your palette up, so you need to put a little bit more paint back on there ready to go. So if you start using up the paint that's on there, then that's absolutely fine. Depending on how much paint you put on your palette in the first place will obviously depend on how quickly you use it up when you're painting. So do feel free at any point if you need to reload your paint, because I will do. Because you do find when you're painting that you're obviously using the paint on that palette and thinning out those colours, and eventually you'll thin it to a point where there's not a huge amount of pigment left on your palette. So of course you'll need to reload it up and put some more paint back on there again, and it will obviously make your colours a lot darker and more vibrant. And start to put in that section on his little wing. don't know if you can hear my clock ticking in the background. If it gets annoying on the videos, please let me know and I will take the battery out of it just so it doesn't drive everyone nuts. I know a ticking clock, sometimes it can drive people bonkers. So that is that section on the wing. And then we've got another area up here. And comes down the back. And I want to put a few details in on this area here, which is actually a brown colour. We're going to really layer up our brown colouring on here soon. But to begin with, I'm just going to put in some of those darker areas. So I'm just using that stippling effect, that bobbing up and down with my brush, putting on those tiny little dots. And it will really start building up that detail and texture that is on the wing. You've got quite a line that goes through here, so again, do that with your brush and then it will do the same as what nature intended. I'll create this section here on the wing. There's another dark area. There we go. And then this kind of joins up with the section we did previously. And goes into that slightly grey section, which is now lovely and dry, which is brilliant. There's actually some green and blue in here too, so we'll add that in later. We'll get some green and blue on the palette and get that going. Now, I don't want to overdo it with black because we've got lots of different dark browns and things in some of these sections, so I don't want the black to like overpower it. So we will put the grey, not the grey, we'll put the brown areas in first and then we can go back over it and make it more grey or more black if we need to. And hopefully yours is building up just the same and you've got some really lovely areas developing. Along here. Clean off my brush. Right, so what I'm going to now do is I'm going to do some of these brown areas around here now. So I want to use some of the yellow ochre, which is already on your palette. I want it a little bit thicker than we had it before because we really thinned it out before. So I do want the yellow ochre to be a little bit more bright in colour. And I'm going to start, so the same kind of stippling effect, and I'm just going to slowly build it up in sections. Now, you want your paint to be damp on the brush, but you don't, again, want it to totally flood your paper, because otherwise you're not going to be painting with nice defined spots. What will happen is you'll just get big blobs of colour on your page, so you want the consistency on your brush to be not thick, but you also don't want it to be really, really runny. So I often say to people, if you can get it to a consistency a little bit like single cream, then it should go on really nice. There we go. Although to be fair, it's probably thinner than that. Hence why I put the camera over the top of my palette, so hopefully you can get an idea then as to how I mix the colours and get the consistencies right. So I'm going to bring it down here a little bit more. Like so. There we are. Now it's starting to go over the top of the grey area that we did earlier. And because those two colours are now merging together, it's really giving it a bit of a lift. It's really giving it some kind of interest. And I'm going to slowly dab my brush up and down on here. And start pulling those areas out on my reference picture that are on here. Now some of these are actually, so when we get onto the body of the butterfly, we'll be using more kind of lines with our paint because it is furry, it's quite fluffy, whereas here we're adding this kind of stippled dotty kind of texture. There we go, and we can build that up onto there. Now we've got to put some of these dark spots on soon, so I think I might leave it there for now when it comes to using that yellow ochre, and start back with the black. Now my black's really thinned out on here, you can see it's practically grey, so I'm just going to put a bit more black on my palette. So there we go, get a nice rich colour going again. Now if at some point you want to change your water, you can do. Mine's not affecting my colours too much at the moment, so I'm going to leave it as it is. But if at any point you're finding that it's making your brighter colours go a bit slodgy and a bit grey looking, then just change your water, because it will make a difference when it comes to you doing your painting. So I'm going to pick up where I left off over here and add in some of the texture. So we've got that stipple effect again around here. And defining that shape on the wing, that little black spot. There we go. And then bring it around the outside edge of that wing. Like so. Right, so we've got a black section down here. It's like a kind of slight oval shape, like that. And then we've got a spot about here. Just adding in some of these lines as we go along. And we've got another kind of nice defined spot here. So I'll add this one in next. I sometimes think when you're following pictures like this as well, it's kind of like there's little areas on the picture that are like little landmarks. So you think, well, if I get that bit in, then I can work out where the next part goes, which is quite handy. So I will add in those spots around here next. And then we've got another spot here, which is one that I outlined with my pencil. So I pop him in next. There we go. Now this orange needs to be a lot brighter. I want to make it a lot brighter in colour, so I'm going to go back over the orange again in a minute. And right, so we now have an area here like so, at the edge of that wing, and then so amazing when you look at the pictures and you'll see things that you've never ever noticed before, and it's pretty incredible. We're very lucky to have such beautiful wildlife around us. I always think we are anyway. I always feel very privileged that we can paint and draw such beautiful things. So my orange is running out on my palette now, so I'm just refilling it. And really wash my brush off well in between. It just looks after your brushes, keeps them nice and clean. So I'm going to add a little bit of that orange now. I'm just going to thin it out a little bit to one side. That's better. And I'm going to darken, because this area here is quite like peachy, it's quite light in colour. So I'm going to add some darker. So I'm going on here with the spotting again, the stippling effect, just gently dabbing up and down, literally just touching it with the tip of my brush. So it's quite fine work when you're doing this. And I'm going to start building up that orange and making it a lot more vibrant. So I'm going to come down here, and I want this to be brighter. Like so. And grab a bit more of that orange, and I'm going to bring it round here. So this is another dark section on the reference picture, so I'm just going to go around the edge of it for now, build up some of that orange like that, and she's looking much better. It's not looking as pale as it was. And I'm just pulling it down. So I started off stippling, but there is like lines running through the sections now, so those brush strokes can change, so we can build it up in a series of very fine little lines and do it that way. That's better, and it's really giving you that detail and texture that you see on the actual wing of the butterfly. So I'm going to thin out some of this orange just to one side, and I'm just going to define some of this area here a little bit more. And I think I need to actually bring some of the orange down to the edge of the wing a little bit more here, so I will do that in a second. So I think I've like missed a spot, which happens, and again, the more you look at the picture, the more you'll notice things. I'm going to actually, whilst I've got this orange mixed, I'm going to just go back over this section at the top here and just make it a little bit more darker in colour. I think it needs a little bit more depth. Same around here as well. You will find when you're playing with your watercolours, like different brands of watercolour do different things. Some dry darker than others, some dry lighter. So when you're playing with your watercolours that you've got at home, you will notice that sometimes you do have to bob back to different sections because sometimes the colours come out too light or too dark. And it's absolutely fine to do that. Just keep adding to it. Now the nice thing is when I paint and do the techniques with you, because I layer it up quite light and get darker, it means that it's easy to go back over and then make those colours a little bit more vibrant. There we go. So we'll make that bit a bit darker there, and a little bit darker around the edge there. Yeah, it's starting to really add a nice bit of texture on there now. And I'm going to add a little bit more around here too. I'm going to use that brush stroke technique this time though, because that is pretty much how the butterfly looks. Start to get some of those more details in there. There we are. Put a couple up here as well. That's it. There we go, it's starting to come together. So back to the black. Get that going again. So if it started drying out, which it had done there, I've just put a bit of water with it just to get the paint going again. So we've got another spot here that we needed to finish from earlier. So I'll pop that little spot in there. Just rough up those edges a little bit so they look a bit more natural. And we've got another spot here. There we go. And then we've actually got a line that runs down between those spots. So I'm going to put that in whilst I can see it, and I've noticed it. And we've got another one that comes through these ones. And we've got another one that comes through these ones, like that. And then we're going to carry on around this edge here. Now there are some bits I've noticed now that I've missed with the orange, so I'm going to have to put them in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to map in the black sections first, I think. Yeah, map in those black sections first and then kind of go from there. So between these two here, we've got like this section along here. Like that. And then we have an area that comes up and round and down. Like that. And then we've got between these two lines, we have got a section that goes across a bit like that. And we have on this side here, we have another area that looks very similar. Along here like that. And then we've got an area in between the two. so. Then it has a little flick area at the bottom there, and then these connect up like so. And then we've got the edge on there like that. There we go. Need a little bit more water on that, it's getting a bit dry. So we've got this one here that we did. I'm just going to make that a little bit darker in sections. Right, so up to this section on here, so we have a few more bits here. Comes down, and then we've got a few little bits on the bottom, and it goes up and across like that, and the same on this side. And then we go up the back of his tail on here like so. You can go back over any of those areas as they start to dry. If they look a bit too grey, you can go back over them with your paintbrush. And then that pretty much does that side of his wing base. There we go. Now, as I said, I did miss out some orange, so I'm going to clean my brush off, get a bit of watered down orange on here. There we go. And I'm going to just fill in some of these areas here that I missed that should have been orange. There we go. And I'm going to let them dry because the black around here is still a bit damp and I don't want the colours to like bleed into one another, so I'm going to let that dry. So what I'm going to actually do is have a slight break. So it's always important to have a bit of a break in between when you're painting. And then I will come back to you guys and we'll carry on with this side of the wing and slowly work our way around the rest of the butterfly. Enjoy a cup of tea.